The rain in Seattle didn't just fall, it lived. It was a constant, gray inhabitant of the city that soaked into the bones of anyone unlucky enough to be outside after dark. For Diana Scott, the rain was an enemy she had been fighting for 6 months. She huddled under the rusted overhang of the Pier 57 warehouse, pulling a thin, damp blanket tighter around her 7-year-old daughter, Maya. "Is it morning yet, Mommy?" Maya whispered, her voice trembling with a slight wheeze that terrified Diana every time she heard it. "Not yet, baby. Just a few more hours until the library opens. We'll get warm there," Diana promised, her heart breaking. Diana wasn't always a shadow on the pavement. 2 years ago, she had a desk, a mortgage, and a husband. A car accident took the husband. A mountain of medical debt and a ruthless layoff took the rest. Now, her world was measured in the distance between public restrooms and the kindness of strangers. That night, the wind picked up, whipping the rain under their meager shelter. Diana knew they couldn't stay there. Maya was shivering too hard. She remembered a glass-fronted skyscraper 3 blocks away, the headquarters of Aegis Financial. It had a deep, heated entryway with heavy rugs. If they were quiet, the night security might let them stay until dawn. They walked through the downpour, 2 ghosts in the mist. When they reached the lobby doors of Aegis, the warmth radiating through the glass felt like a miracle. To Diana's surprise, the outer vestibule was unlocked. They slipped inside, sinking onto the plush carpet behind a large decorative planter. For the first time in days, Maya fell into a deep, silent sleep. Diana, however, couldn't sleep. Her eyes wandered to a sleek, mahogany side table near the elevators. On it sat a forgotten leather portfolio and a heavy silver fountain pen. Beside it was a small stack of elegant, cream-colored stationery. She looked at the logo on the portfolio. Marcus Thorne, Chief Financial Officer. Diana knew that name. She had seen him on the news, a man described as the Iron Calculator, famous for cutting budgets and prioritizing margins over people. But as she sat in the warmth of his building, watching her daughter finally breathe easily, she felt a sudden, inexplicable surge of gratitude. It wasn't just for the heater. It was for the reminder that a world of order and safety still existed. She reached out and took a sheet of paper. Her fingers, cracked and stained with the grime of the streets, felt clumsy against the expensive parchment. Using the silver pen, she began to write. "Dear Mr. Thorne, you don't know me, and you will likely never see me. My daughter and I are taking refuge in your lobby tonight. The rain is very cold, and your building is very warm. Thank you for not locking the outer door. Thank you for the carpet that feels like a bed to a child who hasn't had one in months. I used to be like you. I used to have a pen like this and a schedule to keep. Life is a fragile thing, sir. I hope you never have to learn how quickly it can break. But tonight, because of your lobby, my daughter is dreaming instead of shivering. That is worth more than any budget. With deepest thanks, a mother." She folded the note carefully and placed it inside the leather portfolio, tucked just behind his tablet so he couldn't miss it. She returned the pen to its holder, tucked herself back behind the planter, and held Maya until the first light of dawn began to bleed through the Seattle clouds. At 6 a.m., before the first janitorial shift arrived, Diana woke Maya. They vanished into the fog, leaving nothing behind but a lingering scent of damp wool and a piece of paper that was about to change everything. The elevator chimes at Aegis Financial were tuned to a specific, non-intrusive frequency, a sound of wealth and efficiency. Marcus Thorne stepped out at 7:15 a.m., his tailored charcoal suit sharp enough to cut glass. He was a man of precise habits. A double espresso from the lobby cafe, a quick glance at the Bloomberg terminal, and then the deep dive into the morning's risk assessment reports. Marcus reached his desk and reached for his leather portfolio. He stopped. It had been moved slightly. He was a man who noticed a 2-degree shift in a graph, so he certainly noticed his pen resting at a different angle. As he opened the folder, the cream-colored stationery fell out. He read the note. Once, twice, a third time. His initial instinct was a breach of security. Someone had been in his inner sanctum. He reached for the intercom to summon the head of security, but his hand froze. "Life is a fragile thing, sir. I hope you never have to learn how quickly it can break." The words bit into him. Marcus looked out his floor-to-ceiling window at the gray Seattle skyline. 10 years ago, he had lost his younger brother to a sudden illness. The one thing his money couldn't solve. He knew about things breaking. He walked to the window, looking down at the tiny figures on the sidewalk below. Somewhere down there was a woman who knew how to use a fountain pen with the grace of a scholar but slept behind a planter. He felt a sudden, visceral discomfort with the temperature of his coffee and the softness of his Italian leather chair. "Sarah," he said into the intercom, his voice uncharacteristically thick. "Bring me the security footage from the lobby vestibule between midnight and 6 a.m. now." Sarah, his executive assistant, entered 10 minutes later with a tablet. She looked worried. Marcus Thorne didn't ask for lobby footage unless someone was getting sued or fired. "Is there a problem, Mr. Thorne?" she asked. "Just play it," Marcus commanded, leaning forward. They watched the grainy, high-angle footage. At 1:14 a.m., 2 figures entered. A woman, thin and weighed down by bags, and a small child. Marcus watched as the woman, Diana, checked the perimeter like a soldier, ensuring they weren't in the way of the cameras or the door. He watched her wrap the child in a tattered blanket. Then, he saw her approach his desk in the reception annex. He watched her pick up the pen. There was no malice in her movements, no intent to steal. She handled the silver pen with a strange kind of reverence, a ghost reclaiming a piece of a past life. When she finished writing, she touched the child's forehead, her shoulders shaking with a silent sob, before she retreated into the shadows. "Who are they?" Sarah whispered, her heart sinking. "They are the people we usually look past," Marcus replied. He looked at the note again. The handwriting was impeccable. Spencerian script, the mark of someone highly educated. "Sarah, call the shelters within a 5-block radius. Look for a mother and daughter. The girl has a cough, a heavy one." "Sir, the board meeting starts in 20 minutes, Sarah reminded him. "Cancel it," Marcus said, not taking his eyes off the screen. "And get me a jacket, a warm one. I'm going for a walk." The reality of the streets hit Marcus the moment he stepped outside. The humidity was a physical weight. He walked toward the library, the place the note mentioned. He realized he didn't even know her name. He only knew she was a mother. He found them 3 blocks away, huddled under the awning of a closed bookstore. The girl, Maya, was coughing violently now, a wet, racking sound that echoed against the brick walls. Diana was rubbing the girl's arms, trying to generate heat through friction. "It's a beautiful pen," Marcus said, standing a few feet away. Diana looked up, her eyes wide with a mixture of terror and recognition. She recognized the suit. She recognized the face from the corporate plaques. She stood up instinctively, pulling Maya behind her, her body forming a shield. "I didn't steal it," she said, her voice raspy. "I put it back. I needed to say thank you." "I know you didn't steal it," Marcus said, his voice softer than any of his employees had ever heard it. "My name is Marcus. You wrote me a note about things breaking." Diana's guard didn't drop. "I'm sorry we trespassed. We'll leave. We're going." "She needs a doctor," Marcus said, gesturing to Maya. "That cough isn't just the cold. It's congestion. If you stay out here tonight, it will become pneumonia." "I know," Diana snapped, the desperation finally breaking through her composure. "I know she needs a doctor. I know she needs a bed. Do you think I chose this? Do you think I want her breathing in the exhaust of city buses?" Marcus took a step closer, holding out his hands to show he wasn't a threat. "I have a car around the corner. My assistant has cleared a room at the clinic we sponsor. No questions, no police, no paperwork you can't handle later. Just warmth." Diana looked at her daughter, whose face was flushed with fever, then back at the man who represented the world that had discarded her. She had no reason to trust him, but she had every reason to fear the night. "Why?" she whispered. Marcus looked at the silver pen he had tucked into his pocket. "Because you reminded me that I'm more than an iron calculator. Now, please, get in the car." The Aegis Private Clinic was a world of white marble and hushed voices. For Diana, the transition was jarring. One moment she was smelling the salt and oil of the harbor. The next, She was surrounded by the scent of antiseptic and expensive candles. While the nurses took Maya to a private room to start a nebulizer treatment and check her vitals, Marcus sat with Diana in the waiting area. He had ordered a tray of food, real food, roast chicken, steamed vegetables, and hot tea. Diana ate with a controlled hunger, trying to maintain her dignity. Marcus waited until she was finished before he spoke. "What was your life before?" he asked. Diana wiped her mouth with a cloth napkin. "I was a senior auditor at a firm in Chicago. My husband was a civil engineer. We had a life, Marcus. We had a 401k, a golden retriever, and a mortgage. Then a distracted driver changed the lane and the world. My husband died instantly. I was in the hospital for 3 months. By the time I got out, the medical bills had eaten the insurance. I lost the job because I couldn't walk yet. One thing led to another, and the safety net. It turns out it's made of glass. It shatters the moment you fall on it." Marcus listened, his mind working through the math. He realized that Diana was just a few bad weeks away from being any of his employees. She was brilliant, articulate, and broken by a system he helped maintain. "I spent my career looking at people as lines on a spreadsheet," Marcus admitted, looking at his hands. "If a line was red, we cut it. I never stopped to ask what happens to the red lines." "They go to the pier," Diana said quietly. "They sleep behind your planters." A doctor approached them. "Mr. Thorne, the little girl Maya has a severe respiratory infection, but we caught it in time. She'll need 48 hours of observation and high-dose antibiotics. She's sleeping now." Diana let out a breath she seemed to have been holding for years. She began to cry. Not a loud wail, but a silent, shaking release. Marcus did something he hadn't done in years. He reached out and took her hand. "You're not going back to the pier, Diana," he said. "Not tonight, not ever." The next morning, the sun attempted to pierce through the persistent Seattle mist, casting a pale, ethereal glow over the city. Inside the Aegis private clinic, the atmosphere was a stark contrast to the cold dampness of the streets. Diana awoke in a recliner next to Maya's bed, startled by the silence. For months, her ears had been tuned to the sound of distant sirens, the scuffle of footsteps, and the relentless drip of water. Here, the only sound was the rhythmic hiss of the oxygen concentrator. Marcus Thorne appeared at the door at 8 a.m. carrying a bag from a high-end boutique and 2 cups of coffee. He looked tired, his pristine suit replaced by a cashmere sweater and slacks. He looked less like a CFO and more like a man. "She looks better," Marcus noted, gesturing toward Maya, whose cheeks had regained a hint of their natural rose color. "The fever broke an hour ago," Diana said, standing up and smoothing her wrinkled clothes. She felt out of place, a blemish on the perfection of the room. "I don't know how to thank you, Marcus, but we can't stay here. I know how the world works. Charity has an expiration date." Marcus handed her the bag. "Inside are clothes for you and Maya. There's a shower in the suite. Take your time. When you're ready, my driver is downstairs. I've arranged a temporary apartment, one owned by the company for visiting executives. It's empty. It has a kitchen, a bed, and a lock on the door." Diana shook her head, her pride flaring up. "I can't take that. I'm not a charity project." Marcus stepped closer, his expression hardening with a sudden intensity. "This isn't charity, Diana. It's an investment. I stayed up all night looking into your history. I found your old records in Chicago. You weren't just an auditor. You were one of the best forensic accountants in the Midwest. You found the $4 million discrepancy in the Sutton case." Diana blinked, stunned. "How did you find that?" "I have resources," Marcus said simply. "Aegis is facing a massive internal audit next month. My current team is good, but they are too close to the numbers. They see what they want to see. I need someone who knows how it feels when things break. I need someone who isn't afraid of the truth." He laid a contract on the bedside table. It wasn't a gift. It was a job offer. "Work for me. Earn the apartment. Earn the medical care. Prove to me that the red lines on my spreadsheets are the most valuable assets I have." Transitioning from the concrete to the corporate world was not as seamless as Marcus had hoped. While Diana was brilliant, the psychological scars of homelessness ran deep. In the executive apartment, she found herself sleeping on the floor for the first 3 nights. The bed felt too soft, too vulnerable. She caught herself hoarding bread in her desk drawer at the office, a reflex born from months of not knowing where the next meal would come from. At Aegis, the whispers began almost immediately. The corporate world is a shark tank, and the arrival of a consultant with no recent history, handpicked by the CFO, smelled like blood. "She looks like she crawled out of a storm drain," whispered Bradley, a junior VP who had his eye on Marcus's position. He was standing by the water cooler, unaware that Diana was within earshot. "Thorne is losing his mind. First, he cancels the board meeting for a family emergency, and now he hires a ghost." Diana ducked into the stairwell, her heart hammering. The imposter syndrome was a physical weight. She looked at her manicured nails, a gift from the clinic, and felt like they belonged to someone else. She felt like a fraud in a silk blouse. That afternoon, Marcus called her into his office. He didn't offer her a seat. He simply pointed to a stack of digital ledgers. "The Northbridge account," Marcus said. "Something isn't adding up. 3 other auditors said it's just currency fluctuation. I think someone is stealing. Find it." Diana took the files. For the next 12 hours, she disappeared into the data. The numbers were a language she spoke fluently. As she worked, the anxiety faded. The concrete, the rain, the hunger, they all vanished. There was only the logic of the ledger. By midnight, she found it. A series of microtransactions, each less than $100, routed through a shell company in the Caymans. It was a salami-slicing scam, sophisticated and nearly invisible. The perpetrator wasn't a stranger. It was Bradley. The next morning, the atmosphere in the boardroom was electric. Bradley sat at the long mahogany table, smugly presenting his quarterly projections. Marcus sat at the head, his face an unreadable mask of stone. "And so," Bradley concluded, "we expect a 4% increase in liquidity by—" "Actually, Bradley," Marcus interrupted, "we're looking at a 12% loss in the Northbridge sector. Would you like to explain the Cayman routing?" The color drained from Bradley's face. He looked at Marcus, then at the door as Diana entered. She was wearing a sharp, navy blazer, her hair pulled back in a professional knot. She carried a tablet, which she tapped to sync with the main screen. "Mr. Thorne is referring to the Project X subfolder," Diana said, her voice steady and resonant. "The one you thought you deleted from the main server. I recovered the logs. You've moved $1, $2 million over 18 months. "This is a lie!" Bradley shouted, slamming his hand on the table. "You're going to take the word of this vagrant? I know who you are, Diana. I saw the security footage from the night Marcus brought you in. You're a beggar in a suit." The room went silent. The board members looked from Bradley to Diana, their expressions a mix of shock and judgment. Diana felt the old terror rising, the feeling of the cold rain on her neck. She felt the urge to run, to disappear back into the fog where no one could see her. But then, Marcus stood up. He didn't look at Bradley. He looked at the board. "This woman," Marcus said, his voice echoing with authority, "saved this company $1 million last night. But more importantly, she saved me. She reminded me that our success isn't measured by the numbers we keep, but by the people we protect. Bradley, security is waiting outside. You're not just fired. The authorities have already been notified." As Bradley was let out in handcuffs, the board members began to murmur. One by one, they looked at Diana, not with pity, but with a newfound, hard-earned respect. 6 months later, the rain was still falling in Seattle, but Diana Scott no longer feared it. She stood on the balcony of her own apartment, not a company executive suite, but a home she paid for with her own salary. Inside, Maya was finishing her homework, a healthy, vibrant child who dreamed of becoming a doctor. Diana had become a pillar at Aegis. She headed a new initiative called the Safety Net Project, a corporate-funded program that provided rapid rehousing and job placement for high-skilled individuals who had fallen through the cracks of society. Marcus Thorne had changed too. The iron calculator was gone. In his place was a leader who spent his weekends at community centers and insisted that his employees prioritize their families over their spreadsheets. That evening, Marcus arrived at Diana's for dinner. It had become a tradition, a simple meal between two people who had saved each other in different ways. "I found something today," Marcus said, reaching into his pocket. He pulled out the silver fountain pen. It had been polished until it gleamed like a mirror. "I want you to have it. Officially." Diana took the pen, her fingers tracing the engraving on the side. "Life is fragile. Handle with care." "I used to think I was writing my own story," Diana said, looking at the city lights reflecting in the rain. "But I realized we're all just writing notes to each other in the dark, hoping someone reads them." The story reached its climax on a cold Tuesday in December. Diana was walking toward the Aegis building when she saw a woman huddled near the same warehouse on Pier 57 where she had once stayed. The woman was shielding a small boy from the wind. Diana didn't keep walking. She didn't call the police. She stopped. She reached into her bag and pulled out a card for the safety net project. She knelt down on the wet concrete, ignoring the ruin of her expensive slacks. "It's a cold night," Diana said softly. The woman looked up, her eyes filled with the same guarded terror Diana knew so well. "We're leaving. We won't cause any trouble." "I know you won't," Diana replied, handing her the card and a warm thermos of tea she had been carrying. "My name is Diana. I know a place where it's warm. I know a place where they have rugs so soft your son will think he's sleeping on a cloud. And I know a man who needs to hear your story." As Diana walked the woman toward the building, she looked up at the top floor. Marcus was standing at the window, looking down. He saw them. He didn't turn away. He raised a hand in a small, silent salute. The cycle of the red lines had been broken. The spreadsheet was finally balanced, not with subtractions, but with the infinite addition of human kindness. The homeless mom had left a note, and in doing so, she had rewritten the future of an entire city. The silver pen remained in Diana's pocket, a reminder that while life can break in an instant, it can also be rebuilt, one word, one note, and one act of mercy at a time. While Marcus and Diana had won the battle against Bradley, the war for the soul of Aegis Financial was far from over. The safety net project was bleeding money according to the traditionalists. In the eyes of the majority shareholders, Marcus Thorne had traded his shark-like instincts for sentimentalism, and in the world of high finance, sentimentalism is a liability. The chairman of the board, Arthur Sterling, a man who had been a mentor to Marcus for 2 decades, called a private meeting. The room was heavy with the scent of expensive cigars and the cold chill of calculated decisions. "Marcus," Sterling began, leaning over a mahogany table that had seen more fortunes made and lost than any other in Seattle. "This charity you've embedded into our corporate structure. It's a distraction. The investors are nervous. They don't want to fund a recovery center. They want to fund the next tech acquisition." "It's not charity, Arthur," Marcus countered, his voice like flint. "It's a talent recovery program. Since Diana joined, our internal error rate has dropped by 15%. We are finding people the world threw away, engineers, lawyers, analysts, who just needed a bridge back to stability." "The board doesn't see people, Marcus. They see dividends," Sterling replied. "There is a motion being drafted to remove you. Unless you can prove the financial viability of this project by the end of the quarter, you're out. And your mother with the silver pen? She'll be back on the street before the week is over." Marcus felt a cold surge of adrenaline. He wasn't just fighting for his job anymore. He was fighting for the life Diana and Maya had built. He realized that the only way to save the project was to beat the board at their own game. He had to prove that compassion was more profitable than cruelty. While Marcus fought the corporate battle, Diana faced a ghost of her own. As she was leaving a gala for the safety net project, a man approached her in the parking garage. He was gaunt, wearing a suit that was 5 years out of style and 2 sizes too big. "Diana?" the man asked, his voice shaking. Diana froze. It was Julian, her late husband's brother. The last time she had seen him, he had been the one to tell her that the insurance money was gone, that he couldn't help her because his own firm was failing. He had abandoned her and Maya when they were at their lowest. "Julian," she said, her voice ice cold, "what are you doing here?" "I saw you on the news," he said, stepping into the light. "I saw what you're doing with Thorne. Diana, I'm in trouble. The firm... I made mistakes. I thought maybe, for the sake of your husband's memory, you could talk to Marcus. I need a loan. A big one. The irony was a bitter pill. The man who had turned his back on a homeless widow was now begging that widow for a corporate lifeline. Diana looked at him and didn't see a villain. She saw the desperation she used to feel every morning. But she also saw the manipulation. I don't use Marcus for favors, Julian, Diana said firmly. If you need help, apply through the project like everyone else. We provide paths to work, not handouts for bad choices. You think you're so high and mighty now? Julian hissed, the mask of the grieving relative slipping. You're still just a girl who slept in a lobby. If the press finds out Marcus Thorne is using company funds to prop up his stray, this whole house of cards falls down. Diana realized then that Julian wasn't just a beggar. He was a threat to everything Marcus had built. The stress of the board's ultimatum and Julian's threats began to take a toll. But the real blow came from where Diana least expected. Maya's health. The initial infection from the nights on the street had left Maya's lungs scarred. A sudden, severe cold snap in Seattle triggered a relapse. Diana found herself back in the hospital, but this time the fear was different. Before, she was afraid of the bill. Now, she was afraid of the loss. Marcus arrived at the hospital at 2 a.m., skipping a crucial preparation meeting for the board's vote. He found Diana in the chapel, the silver pen clutched in her hand like a talisman. I'm going to resign, Marcus, she whispered without looking up. Julian is threatening to go to the press. The board is looking for any reason to kill the project. If I stay, I'm the target. If I leave, maybe they'll let you keep the funding for the others. Marcus sat beside her, the silence of the chapel wrapping around them. Do you remember the note you wrote? You said life is a fragile thing. If we break now, Diana, we prove them right. We prove that the red lines can't survive the wind. I don't care about the board. I don't care about the press. I care about the truth. But Maya has the best doctors in the world because you had the courage to write that note, Marcus said. We don't run. We double down. The day of the board's vote arrived. The room was packed with the most powerful figures in Washington state finance. Arthur Sterling sat at the head, gavel in hand, ready to end the Thorne era. Marcus stood up, but he didn't open a PowerPoint. Instead, he invited Diana to the podium. She was trembling, but her voice was like steel. She didn't talk about statistics. She showed them the silver pen. She told them the story of the night she thought she would lose her daughter to the cold, and how a single heated lobby changed the trajectory of a life. But then, she did something no one expected. She turned the screen on to show a live feed from the Aegis lobby. It wasn't empty. It was filled with 50 people, the first graduates of the Safety Net project. They were teachers, accountants, and engineers. They weren't asking for money. They were showing their employment contracts from other firms. In 6 months, Diana said, looking Arthur Sterling in the eye, this project has returned $12 million to the local economy through the taxes and spending of these individuals. We didn't give them a handout, we gave them their dignity back. And in return, they've made Aegis the most respected brand in the city. If you fire Marcus today, you aren't just losing a CFO. You're losing the future of this company's reputation. The room was silent. Julian, who had been sitting in the back waiting to leak his story to a reporter, realized he had no leverage. The scandal was actually a triumph. The board voted 8-2 in favor of Marcus. Not only was the Safety Net project saved, but it was granted a permanent endowment. A year later, the lobby of Aegis Financial was redesigned. The decorative planter where Diana and Maya had once hidden was replaced with a beautiful, understated bronze plaque. It didn't have the company's mission statement or a list of founders. It simply featured the image of a fountain pen and a single sentence. No one is a red line. Marcus and Diana stood in the lobby as the first snow of the season began to fall. Maya, now a healthy 8-year-old in a bright red coat, ran across the plush carpet, laughing as she headed toward the elevator. You never did tell me, Marcus said, watching Maya. What happened to the original note? Diana smiled, reaching into her coat pocket. She pulled out the yellowed piece of cream-colored stationery, now framed in a small protective sleeve. I kept it, she said, to remind me that even when the world is cold, A single word of thanks can start a fire. Marcus looked at the woman who had started as a ghost in his lobby and ended as the conscience of his life. He realized that the CFO hadn't just read the note. He had become the answer to it. The rain in Seattle continued to fall, but for the first time in a long time, the city felt warm. As the safety net project grew into a national model, Marcus Thorne felt he was finally at the pinnacle of his life. For the first time, his wealth had a purpose beyond the accumulation of more wealth. However, fate has a way of reminding even the most powerful men of their own fragility. During a routine checkup, the doctor noticed something. A week later, Marcus sat in a sterile office, the same silver pen he had given Diana clipped to his pocket. The diagnosis was a rare, aggressive form of an autoimmune disorder. It wasn't a death sentence yet, but it was a battle that would require him to step back from the world he had built. The iron calculator was suddenly faced with a variable he couldn't control. "I spent my life avoiding the broken parts of humanity," Marcus whispered to the empty room. "And now, I am the one who is breaking." He kept the news from Diana for 3 weeks. He watched her lead meetings with a grace and ferocity that made him proud. But every time she looked at him with those eyes full of gratitude, he felt a pang of guilt. He had saved her from the streets. But he couldn't save himself from his own biology. When Marcus finally collapsed in his office, it was Diana who found him. The sight of the man who had been her rock lying helpless on the floor shattered the last of her illusions of security. But she didn't panic. The streets had taught her how to survive in a crisis. As Marcus underwent treatment, the board of directors, still harboring some of the old shark instincts, tried to use his illness as a reason to seize control and dismantle the social programs. They argued that a distracted leadership was a risk to the shareholders. Diana stepped into the breach. She wasn't just a consultant anymore. She was the heartbeat of the company. She walked into the boardroom, not with a plea for mercy, but with a mountain of evidence. "You think Marcus is weak because he is ill?" she challenged the room. "He built a system that functions because it is based on human loyalty, not just algorithms. If you move against him now, you don't just lose a CFO. You lose the loyalty of every employee who saw him as a man of honor." She spent her days at the hospital and her nights at the office, repeating the very act of endurance she had practiced on the cold piers of Seattle. This time, she wasn't fighting for a bed. She was fighting for the man who had given her one. The treatment was grueling. Marcus lost weight, his hair thinned, and his voice became a shadow of its former resonance. In his darkest hours, when the pain made him regret ever stepping out of his cold, calculated shell, he received a visit. It wasn't just Diana. One by one, the people he had helped through the safety net project began to show up. A former mechanic he had helped retrain brought him books. A woman who had been a homeless teacher brought Maya to play music in the garden outside his window. "You told me once that you didn't know what happened to the red lines on the spreadsheet," Marcus told Diana as she sat by his bed. "Now I know. They become the rope that holds you up when you're falling." The support wasn't just emotional. It was clinical. One of the lead researchers on his condition had actually been a doctor who lost his license due to medical debt and was reinstated through Diana's program. The red lines were literally saving the man who had once tried to erase them. 6 months later, Marcus Thorne walked back into the Aegis building. He was thinner, and he used a cane, but his eyes were brighter than they had ever been in his years as a ruthless executive. The company held a gala, but it wasn't to celebrate profits. It was the launch of the Thorne Scott Foundation, a global initiative to ensure that no child would ever have to sleep behind a planter in a lobby again. Diana stood on the stage, looking out at a sea of faces, some wealthy, some who had lived on the streets only months prior. She looked at Marcus, who was sitting in the front row, holding Maya's hand. "2 years ago, I wrote a note with a pen I didn't own, in a building I didn't belong in," Diana told the crowd. "I thought I was saying goodbye to my dignity. But I was actually saying hello to a world that was waiting for someone to be brave enough to ask for help, and I found a man who was brave enough to give it." The applause wasn't the polite clapping of a corporate event. It was a roar of genuine human connection. The story concludes where it began, but the world had shifted. Diana and Marcus sat on a bench overlooking the Puget Sound. The rain was falling, as it always did in Seattle, but they were under a sturdy umbrella. Maya was a few yards away, taking photos of the sunset with a camera Marcus had given her for her birthday. "Do you ever miss the old Marcus?" Diana asked playfully. "The one who only cared about the fourth quarter?" Marcus laughed, a sound that was no longer sharp but warm. "That man was a ghost, Diana. He had a lot of money, but he was the poorest person I've ever known. He was cold, even in a heated office. You're the one who finally brought me inside." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, leather-bound book. He handed it to her. It was a collection of notes. Thousands of them. They were letters from people across the country who had been inspired by their story to open their doors, to hire the unhireable, and to look at the homeless not as a problem to be solved, but as people to be known. "This is the real ledger," Marcus said. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden light over the gray water, the camera would pan out to show the city of Seattle. In dozens of windows, the lights of Aegis Financial and other companies were glowing. For the first time, those lights didn't just represent business. They represented a sanctuary. The note left by a homeless mom hadn't just stunned a CFO. It had redefined the value of a human life. And as the screen fades to black, the final image is that silver pen, resting on a desk, ready for the next person to write a story of hope.